Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our June LEPC meeting. We are excited to have you all here. Thank you for allowing us to provide this cool option today, as we are experiencing some weather this afternoon, so we wanted to make sure we provided a safe opportunity for everybody to join us. We have an exciting, fun-filled afternoon to discuss about hurricane preparedness. So we have a guest speaker coming in today, an excellent one. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Reddick, the director of our department. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm not sure what you meant by fun-filled, but I always do have a good time with this group. So it is indeed a pleasure to kind of talk through what we may be having to work through maybe sooner than later during a So this will not be the kind of hurricane brief that we get from the Weather Service. They are the professionals. So we'll just kind of talk through what we're seeing and really in our plan and how we will work through whatever comes our way this hurricane season. I do feel obligated to provide to you something that you've probably already seen, that being the seasonal outlook for this year. And I know there's been a lot of conversations about will the La Nina interact atmospherically with the temperatures of the Atlantic coast, and will it decrease the number of storms that we're going to get? I'll just tell you, and we've said this time and again, this chart right here means absolutely nothing to us. It's interesting to kind of hear, but we know that a less than active season could still be a bad one for us because it only takes one storm to be impactful and make it really a bad day for Norfolk. There already is, this early in June, a named storm in the Atlantic with another system right behind it. So it is already rather active. So that should probably answer any questions related to La Nina. And again, we're going to continue to have that forward-leaning posture, which we go into June 1st. We are in readiness condition 5 per our emergency operations plan that we are in June 1st through November 30th, regardless of if there's a storm out there or not. So we're already doing what we should be doing to be prepared for Brett or anything else that might visit our community. These are the names of the storms this year. Again, it's irrelevant to us what the storms are named, although sometimes we feel like a more fierce, scary name might be more appropriate than maybe Whitney or Vince. But that said, I don't know if y'all understand that names are recycled every 6 years, unless it causes enough devastation economically or by taking lives. If that's the case, if that threshold is met, a name of a storm is retired. So we will never see another Katrina. We'll never see another Sandy. We'll never see another Floyd. I mean, all those storms that have caused destruction in the past, those names are retired. And otherwise, if it comes and goes with no storm or no such impact, then it will be reused again through the World Meteorological Organization. This wasn't always the case. We refer to our storm of record as the 1933 storm. So it was usually, before that, it was named on, based on the gods of whatever countries. Then it was based on years. And then it was based on men's names. And then they started going by men's and women's names. And before that, the military used Alpha Bravo, the phonetic alphabet. But this is where we are, and they recycle every 6 years. Just a little factoid if it comes up on Trivial Pursuit. This is really the graphic that we pay attention to and try to communicate throughout our entire community. Again, regardless of the storm outlook, storms have happened. Storms will continue to happen. And as it pertains to the issue of climate change and the temperatures increasing the further up we get in the Atlantic, like our area, then the more susceptible we're going to be for the larger catastrophic category storms. So we've been pretty blessed having tropical storms, be the norm, maybe a Cat 1 occasionally, but the temperatures aren't as warm up here as they are down off the Florida coast. If that continues to that upward trend in temperatures, then we might very well see stronger storms because it's the water temperature that feeds those storms as they work their way across the Atlantic. Obviously, the direction of the storm is a pretty significant factor as well. When it comes up the coast, that's the way we like it because it tends to break up a little bit while it goes over land, whereas a diagonal storm like Isabel was and the 33, it's going to have a greater impact with winds and storm surge and the like. But this is the graphic that I like to show because hurricanes and tropical storms and even nor'easters really are the high probability, high impact threats that we face, certainly as identified in our hazard mitigation. And really one of the reasons why we have certainly a hurricane response plan. Now, I wanted to show this to you. This is FEMA's latest nationwide preparedness survey, and it kind of shares, really gives us a snapshot of where our residents and businesses are as it pertains to preparedness to any types of disasters. I know in the survey later they go into the active threat, pandemic, hazmat situation, and those types of things, but preparedness overall, it really doesn't look that good. There are a lot of challenges that we face to get the word out and challenges in place for folks to make preparedness a priority when there's so many other competing challenges and priorities. But this is kind of what we're looking at in terms of where our residents are. This is not region specific, but it is broken up by different cultures and backgrounds, which I'll get to in a little bit. But this is just one of the challenges that we as hurricane planners and disaster planners are facing, really getting the importance of individual preparedness across and have it resonate with folks to really take action. One of those is signing up for alerts and warnings. So I wanted to make sure that this group knew that there are two ways that folks will get notified in Norfolk. One is subscription-based. That's our Norfolk Alert. It's an Everbridge program, pardon me, where folks do have to subscribe. And once they subscribe, they will receive weather alerts from the National Weather Service automatically because it consumes whatever the Weather Service puts out and then automatically relays it to the subscribers, and also incident updates. So if there is a life-threatening situation that we want to let folks know, we're going to send a wireless emergency alert, but then after that, we're going to continuously update folks through Norfolk Alert, which would also be updating our Norfolk.gov emergency page, as well as our social media platforms. Wireless emergency alerts, you don't have to subscribe for, and that's that funky ringtone or vibration that you get for an Amber Alert or other types of emergency weather warnings, if you will, tornado warning. So that's the threshold in order for us to be qualified to send out a wireless emergency alert. And not everyone is. There are certain things that you have to go through training and certification-wise to do it. And we've been doing it, I think, since 2013. It has to reach a certain criteria for us to be able to send it out into the community. And it pings off the cell towers in the community and everyone within a certain parameter that we set. So we would be sending out a wireless emergency alert for an initial life-saving warning, and then Norfolk Alert for updates ever since then. We do test the wireless emergency alert monthly. So we have different parts of the community that are classified for each month. And so we continuously make sure that we do a test once a month, and we make it throughout the entire community throughout the entire year. We want to make sure that folks are aware of what it is, how it's to be used, while still encouraging folks to subscribe for Norfolk Alert. Before I go any further, are there any questions about our alert capabilities? Awesome. All right, moving on. Not many folks know their hurricane evacuation routes. So we're going to continuously press the Know Your Zone capability and let folks know where they are in the community and what zone they're in. And the fact that they may not necessarily need to go to Richmond like the message used to be. It was always about the contraflow, the lane reversals, trying to get folks out, and hopefully with over a 36-hour period, the folks that had to evacuate should be safely in the Richmond area. Due to better technology, topography, and everything else, they may just need to go from evacuation zone A to B or C, which could really just be a couple blocks away. So that's the message that we will continue to provide. But I will say that if it's a Category 3 storm, then it would be all bets off, everyone leave, because just the building codes in Norfolk and Virginia in general are not built to withstand those strongs of winds, especially our shelters. So we could not ask staff to work in a shelter where we know might be compromised by the winds. And likewise, we would not want our residents to go to a place that we know could potentially be compromised through the winds. So we would be really trying to facilitate a mass evacuation out of the area, relying on contract buses to get folks out and taking them to designated points in really Richmond and points west. Any questions about Know Your Zone? Okay. I will say that evacuation will be interesting, and that's an understatement, because in order for us to benefit from those contract charter buses from the state contract, we have to let them know 111 hours in advance if we need those buses, and then with a confirmation at 114 hours. And that way they could initiate the contract and bring those buses in from pretty much throughout the nation. The problem is at 111 hours out before the arrival of Tropical Storm Force winds, that storm may very well be where Tropical Storm Brett is right now, nowhere near our coast. So it really involves some very important and costly decisions on some very imperfect, if not otherwise unavailable information, which we will err on the side of safety like we did during Floyd, and the buses were en route. But when the trajectory of Floyd changed to the North Carolina area instead of us, they were able to divert those buses, and thankfully we did not have to eat the costs. The state bore them for us, but the expectation, the planning assumption is when we request those buses, we're responsible because they're on the road, they're paying staff, they're charging the fuel and everything else. That's something we have to keep in the back of our head when we make that resource request. Community hubs is something that we're working on, and Councilwoman Johnson, I appreciate your support and being on the call. There's a few areas in the community we're trying to pilot this concept with the intention of really getting them throughout the entire community. And by doing this, we are trying to identify places in the various neighborhoods where folks know they can automatically go after a disaster. So if there's a landfall, and it's going to take a while for the government to get to any particular part of the city because of debris in the roads or whatever, the intention is for folks to start that problem solving at the most localized level. Neighbors helping neighbors, identifying who has what needs and who has what resources, and really starting to work through that response and recovery process as early as possible, with the message essentially being they are the help until help arrives. I think that's a change in the culture as well, nationwide, like we saw through that survey. There's a lot of folks who rely and assume the government is going to be there for them at all times, before, during, and after a disaster. So I think by having these hubs and conducting the necessary training leading up to a particular incident, and even doing drills and exercises, hopefully we're going to be able to communicate the need for that personal preparedness, for working with each other at the neighborhood level. The fact that the government cannot possibly be everywhere at once with the limited resources that we have, but together we can certainly be a more resilient community and get folks the help they need at the quickest possible time following any disaster, natural or man-made. Are there any questions about the hubs? Okay. So the demographics for that FEMA survey, like I said, it wasn't region specific, but it does look at different demographics, and the demographics answer the questions much differently. And the reason I want to bring that up is because, again, Ms. Johnson and all the members of council unanimously approved the recommendation for an emergency management advisory committee. And just to clarify between the LEPC and this advisory committee, the LEPC is, the professionals in our community, regardless of level of government or sector, who do disaster planning. We speak the language. We know what the expectations are. We know how the process works, and we work together to make our plans as efficient as possible as we continue to build our relationships over trust, because we're the team that's going to respond to anything, whether it's a hurricane, winter storm, terrorist attack, whatever it is. The Emergency Management Advisory Committee, which was approved during the last council meeting, is designed to bring folks in from various backgrounds, various cultures, faiths, abilities, who have no disaster experience whatsoever. And so we want to make sure that we work with them at the boots on the ground level to really give us a good reality check of our plans. Are we meeting the needs of everybody? Have we considered ways that we can communicate with others that we haven't already thought of? So it's really to get a true makeup of the community, because it's no secret that emergency management isn't as diverse as we would like it in the first place. But get folks from different worldviews, different perspectives, and really make our plans as real and useful as possible. And I'm really excited this group is going to get off the ground. And again, I have a lot to thank Ms. Johnson for getting this up and running. So Ms. Johnson, thank you again, and looking forward to doing good things with this group.
You're welcome.
Oh, ma'am, go ahead.
No, I was just saying you're welcome, and thanks to everybody involved. I can't wait to see what comes out of the advisory committee. So thank you for leading it.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, one thing that came out of the pandemic from COVID is the social inequities, the medical, the economic, all the different types of challenges our residents face on a daily basis, which are all types of compounded during an actual acute incident like a hurricane. And so having that understanding and incorporating that information into our plans, it's really setting us up to be more strategic with where we might pre-stage resources or otherwise deploy them after a particular incident. So, we rely on the Social Vulnerability Index that the CDC puts out. We rely on regular communications with Norfolk Public Schools, the Nutrition Division. We rely on the information that we get from Human Services, who knows how many folks in the community rely on Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, SNAP benefits, and after a disaster, the DSNAP, the Disaster SNAP benefits. All this information gets us a really good picture of where the greatest need is going to be. And again, we can work with them before the disaster and certainly after the disaster. So we're helping those, we're doing the greatest good for the greatest number for the individuals with the greatest need. So this information is here for us. We incorporate that into our EOC planning division process and into our plans. And I think we're a lot better situated now than we had been in previous disasters with this information ready at our fingertips. Speaking of information at our fingertips, we make most all of our plans available online. You guys, the LEPC should have access to all of our plans anyway, but if not, or if you want to share the plans with anyone, just go to norfolk.gov and search for Team Norfolk plans. And you'll have our mitigation plans, which talks about the threats and hazards our community faces, as well as the goals and objectives we plan to take to limit, minimize, or eliminate altogether those hazards. It talks about what this group is, the Local Emergency Planning Committee, and how we are categorized by emergency support functions and how we'll work together during an incident. And then you look at the different hazard-specific annexes. There are more on the way, and of course there are some we won't obviously post because they're public safety sensitive. But we try to make sure that everyone has as much information as we can give them so they're fully informed. There's a really good book, and I think I've referenced it before, from Amanda Ripley, who wrote The Unthinkable, Those Who Survive Disasters and Why. And she really makes the point that it's the time of the emergency is not the time to inform folks what your plans are. They will more likely do what we hope that they would do if they were informed and educated prior to. So by making sure that folks have the information, I hope that it results in more trust in what we're doing, less rumors in terms of why we're doing it, and otherwise, again, just making sure that we replace any fear with facts, and being inclusive in the planning process and making sure that everybody knows what the plans say. I would encourage you, if you haven't already read it, because your organization is probably listed in there, because you'll note that the cover of the plan says Team Norfolk Emergency Operations. It does not say City of Norfolk Operations. So we have been very intentional and very inclusive in making sure everyone understands their roles, and also how we work together throughout an incident. The how-to, the fundamentals on how we work together is spelled out in the Emergency Operations Basic and Administrative Plan. And then again, we have hazard-specific annexes for those incidents that bring different nuances that are more complex than we could identify in just a basic plan. So these are the two plans we go to right off the bat. And so what we're looking at in our Emergency Operations Center is right here and available at your fingertips. And I hope that you're looking at it too, because I see these plans as our plans, not just Norfolk EOC plans. Are there any questions about the plans? All right. Now, in terms of process, here's how it's worked for the past several years, and I think it's worked pretty well. We will get information from the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. They will typically, and I'll talk specifically for a hurricane or tropical storm, they will typically schedule a weather call for our region, and we are Region 5 for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, and we are in FEMA Region 3. So the Weather Service and the Virginia Department of Emergency Management will hook up. VDEM will facilitate the call, while Jeff and his team at the Weather Service in Wakefield will conduct the weather briefing of exactly what they're seeing, what they're anticipating, and things like that. And then it gives the state the opportunity to ask the local emergency operations centers what we might be thinking, what resources we might be requesting, and otherwise just, again, that information sharing so we're all leaning forward with the same information on which to plan and respond. Now, there is coordination between VDEM and FEMA. FEMA Region 3, which is headquartered out of Philadelphia and inclusive of Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., West Virginia, and Virginia. And so VDEM is then feeding that information to FEMA in Philadelphia to make sure that there is a linkage and information sharing between the local, state, and feds. For those who may not remember government in school and civics, the locality does not go straight to FEMA. We have to go through the state, and then the state goes through the feds. However, that gets a little blurry in what I'm about to tell you. So the next level is regional or local. And so, again, while VDEM is managing those weather calls, it is Region 5, which, it's all of the south side localities, a lot of the peninsula. We're all getting the same information. And we also, outside of those calls, we have conversations about, well, who might be looking to declare a local emergency? Who's looking to open shelters? And who might be looking at evacuations and things like that? It's collaboration. I wouldn't say it's necessarily coordination, because nobody's telling anybody else kind of what to do, or nobody's doing it because someone else is doing it. But I will say that there is that hope that we can be consistent throughout the region. So it doesn't matter if you live in one locality and live in another or work in another, you kind of have an expectation of what's going on. So we here at our Emergency Operations Center, we participate in those calls. We often invite you folks from the LEPC to participate virtually or in person, so you can also be aware of what's being discussed, and also hearing what we're getting from the National Weather Service. And then we also brief out the city manager's office, the policy team, which is Dr. Filer and his deputy city managers, as well as the communications folks, and sometimes human services or human resources. And of course, with the information that we discuss, we come up with effective messaging for Ms. Johnson and the rest of City Council, so they are well briefed on what exactly is going on. Now, when there is an activation, which could be in person or virtual like this, we activate. Oh, go ahead. Oh. Awesome. Welcome, Cheryl. Glad you were able to join us.
I got kicked out.
Sorry.
You are now joining the meeting.
That wasn't intentional. So
please wait for the leader to admit you to the meeting. You are now joining the meeting.
All right, we should be good. So, thank you, ma'am. Now, as far as the Emergency Operations Center goes, I think we're getting some feedback. Awesome. All right. So, in terms of operating or activating the Emergency Operations Center, that's something that we won't formally do until the storm is a lot closer, because we don't want folks to work in the EOC just sitting there. We want them to be gainfully employed in preparatory and protective actions ahead of the storm. So what we will do is have regular briefings, probably morning and afternoon, leading up to the event. Now, the information that we get from the National Weather Service and the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, as well as the Dominion Energy a lot of times, I will try to summarize that information and send that to you via Norfolk Alert and our blog. So, hey, Daniel, can you go ahead and mute that line?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So, I try to take all that information that we get, summarize it, not only for the city manager's office and council, but for this team as well. Because, again, this is the team with whom we plan, train, and exercise. It sure as heck is the team that I want to be in the foxhole with me when we're going to go into battle. So I make sure that you have as much information that is sent to you by Norfolk Alert, and you click on the link, and it takes you to the blog that we have that really gives you the hows and the whys behind what we may be thinking. Now, what comms puts out, and I don't know if Chris and Kelly are on the line, what they put out through the Joint Information Center is official information. It's vetted. It's meant for public consumption. It is put out either through Norfolk Alert and all the social media platforms and the website. It is factual. This is where the shelters are. This is where parking garages are that are open. I mean, this is stuff that, again, has been vetted for release. What you are going to get through the blog that we put together is, again, some of the hows and the whys, and not necessarily official information. It's still things that have to play out based on the information that we are waiting for from the Hurricane Center or the Storm Surge Unit or whatever, but we just want to give you an idea of what we're thinking. It fits outside the times for our briefings, because we try to make sure our briefings are regular, are consistent, but also brief so the work can get done and we're not just on a call for 30, 45 minutes like we used to do. So that's kind of how that works, is from the state, comes down to us, and then we try to manage the Emergency Operations Center and the Joint Information Center. Now, the part where there's some blurring with VDEM, the state level, and the feds is the fact that some localities, Norfolk being one, we're expecting to have a liaison from FEMA and VDEM in the Emergency Operations Center with us. So they're going to sit in the planning cell, and they are there to help grease the skids, if you will, if there's a particular need, if there's something that we maybe haven't thought of, or if we're not necessarily getting maximum effect with any resource requests or information requests from the different state and federal agencies. They're there to help us get through that and make sure that we're all working in a unified effort. Not every locality has that. So again, Jeff Affman is our liaison. He is a terrific guy. We worked a lot with him with the vaccination clinic, and I'm really glad that he's going to be our liaison from FEMA. And I'm not yet sure who from VDEM is going to be, but it's going to be all kinds of helpful to have the three levels of government in one space working through in that capacity. Any questions on how the information flow, the process, or anything else is going to work?
Hey, Jim, we did have a question in the chat. There was a question of who gets invited to those VDEM Region 5 meetings, the government, non-government organizations.
You know what? When we are made aware of them, we haven't always in the past, but we can send out the Norfolk alert to the group and say, if you're interested, you have to come here to observe. Because a lot of times they are limited by the amount of spots with the programs that they use. And so it's almost just enough to have the localities and some of the agencies. But we invite folks to our office area here or at the EOC proper to make sure that they can participate. Is that good?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right.
In the chat.
So if you were in the EOC, this is how we try to categorize or otherwise organize in that Emergency Operations Center environment. So we have a public safety table, right? So that's going to be the police, fire, and sheriff's office, and those folks who are dealing with those life safety issues in the traditional way that we're used to. So we have public safety, we have mass care, so human services, let's see, CSB, public health. I mean, all those different folks who are focusing on water, food, medical support, and those types of things that really go out and touch the individual. That's this group right here, the mass care group. So again, multiple agencies sitting at the table, really collaborating with each other and sharing information and resources is the intent. And then we have our critical infrastructure group. So general services, public works, public utilities. Sometimes we get folks from Cox Communications or Verizon. I mean, all those things on which we rely to do the job, they're going to be at the critical infrastructure table to make sure that the systems that we need are actually working in the way that we need it. And if they're not, then they're at the table to get them fixed. So that's kind of how we're set up. We have the mass care, we have the critical infrastructure, we have the public safety, and then we have the Joint Information Center. And then beyond that, we have the policy group where the manager and his DCMs kind of sit when they're not going out to the other tables. And then we have the planning group, planning/logistics, which is where the emergency management staff and some of our support sit to make sure that we're always looking ahead at the next operational period and also getting folks the resources that they need when they need it. Now, I believe most of the group knows this, but just in case, the primary shelters that we look at ahead of a storm is always Granby High School, Norview High School, and Southside STEM. We occasionally look at Crossroads, but by and large, it's Granby, Norview, and Southside are going to be the three that we activate most. That information is online. However, we also put the caveat that there's no guarantee that that particular school will be available due to repairs being made or roof damage or whatever it is. There are reasons why schools may not be available in the summertime. We let folks know that these are the schools and this is what they offer, but they're also subject to change, and the actual schools to be used will be announced at the time of the storm. Being data informed in everything that we do, or at least we try to be data informed, we looked at the different evacuation zones to figure out where it made the most sense. Evacuation zones A, B, C, and D, there is no D in Norfolk, and so we tried to get them in C as much as possible, Granby being the exception. That's in B, and is actually a lesson learned from a few years ago when there were kids that were in transport from a field trip who got stuck at Granby because all the area around Granby was flooded out, and their buses or their parents couldn't get through. So we had more shelter guests than we anticipated. Now, in terms of shelters, in prior years, the homeless in our community has always been the first in and the last out. That's since changed when Sarah and our CSB team was able to procure a facility that houses a lot of homeless residents now. So there is no plan to evacuate that facility that is on high ground to move them to a temporary emergency shelter. That doesn't mean all homeless are taken care of. There are still some out in the community, some that are not eligible to stay in that facility, They have tiger teams that know where these folks are, and they go out and corral them ahead of the storm to make sure that they get to a shelter during that inclement weather. All shelters are pet shelters. That was certainly a lesson learned from Hurricane Katrina, that folks won't evacuate or go to a shelter without their pets. Scott Mahone does a great job with our CERT volunteers, and there are a lot of folks who love animals. In fact, we find a lot more folks willing to work in a pet shelter than we do a human shelter. But I'm glad to say that we are at that point where every shelter that we open will also be one that accepts pets. For anyone with transportation needs, again, we saw that in Hurricane Katrina and all the buses that were flooded out. We have a fantastic relationship with Norfolk Public Schools, and wherever we have a shelter opened, there will also be a bus and an assigned bus driver, and a handicapped accessible bus and a bus driver at each of those locations. And so if anyone needs a ride, they can call the Norfolk Cares call center, and that would be routed to the EOC and then dispatched from there, that whoever is serving in that role. And so transportation assistance is available through public schools as well as Hampton Roads Transit. I know, Steve, you're on, and I was really pleased a few years back when AHRT made changes to their reservation process for folks who relied on paratransit. So instead of having more than a 24-hour reservation requirement, they relaxed that, so folks who are going to a shelter were able to do so with less of a time constraint. Steve, I want to make sure I got that right. Is that how you understand it as well?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for all you do, and HRT as well. Medical transport. Man, I'd like to put a green checkbox next to that. There's been a lot that's been done in terms of having a medically friendly shelter. Of course, ADA shelters is something that we strive for, and we've worked a lot with Cheryl Simpson and the Independence Center, and again, we're forever grateful to them for all the advice and the participation in our meetings. They've been a fantastic partner. We have a shelter support unit that has medical supplies and equipment that for the longest time the plan has been to do that at Norview. And that's really still the plan, though I see the need to be able to disperse that equipment to the different shelters as the need arises, because to me, if we're going to be fully ADA accessible, we're not going to segregate folks and tell them they have to go to a special shelter. We're going to tell them, if we have what they need, we're going to bring it to the shelter that they chose to go to. And I think we still have to work through that piece. I know we also have to continue working through the medical support piece with contract nursing support, and for that there had been conversations not too long ago. And Scott Mahone, if I could, I'd like to ask you to kind of report out on where we are with that need.
So thank you, Jim. We are working with the Norfolk Public Schools health supervisor in offering a program for the school nurses to come into the shelters. A lot of them are familiar with the schools and the setups, and they would supplement our medical support in each of the shelters we open up with. Now, with the schools being closed during the event or hurricane, they would be accessible, and we're working out the shifts that they would work, what types of services they would provide in each of the shelters, and it's looking good right now. We also have a MOU with Lake Taylor Transitional Care, and for anyone that comes to any of our shelters that we don't have the medical equipment or needs to handle somebody with a severe medical issue, we would transport them to Lake Taylor, and they would assist the individuals during these events. So some of the issues that we are working on is securing that MOU with the schools and their nurses.
Thanks, Scott. We'll get that buttoned up sooner than later. I just want to say this as well. This is an area where we've not yet been challenged. I mean, since I've been here in 2011, I don't recall a situation where we weren't able to meet someone's accessibility need or medical need. Now, I mean, obviously, I think we have a pretty good team, and who's designed to respond to whatever the incident is throughout all of Team Norfolk. And so That's not the concern. The concern is the unknowns, because we just haven't experienced a catastrophic storm that we've seen happen in the Gulf or further down the Atlantic coast, where, I mean, the need truly exists. We just haven't been exposed to it at that level. We've done training and exercises. Again, we've worked a lot with Cheryl, worked with a lot with our community partners and throughout the region. We've done this type of shelter training and exercises, but we just haven't had the real thing. And so until we do, I just don't feel comfortable saying, yeah, we're good to go, because I know there are still so many lessons to learn that we're going to continue to research and apply in our planning. And then regional and state shelters. We actually had a call on this earlier today. You know, the fact that the state understands that they have a role to play to support the localities as it pertains to shelters. Again, I said earlier, we don't have an evacuation zone D here, so our need might come sooner than others. And, you know, we should have an idea of what that might look like so many hours before the arrival of tropical storm force winds. So, you know, the fact that they have state-managed shelter facilities identified in various colleges and universities, state-owned, you know, again, starting at Christopher Newport and going out west. They even have agreements in West Virginia, as far out as that. So, you know, that piece is being worked out, as well as the concept of a regional shelter, where we might try to, again, because of the populations being so small and the number of shelters that we open, trying to figure out, does it make more sense to have a regional shelter and have that go to capacity before we start opening up local shelters, or vice versa? You know, do we look at the populations in our local shelters and then decide to open up a regional shelter to augment those capabilities? So those conversations are taking place. Obviously, it's going to cost, you know, time, resources, manpower to make it work, and so we're not there, but at least we're heading in that direction to augment everybody's shelter capacity. Any questions with shelters? All right. Like I said, we're trying to do everything we can to be data informed, and with the information that we have at our fingertips, we'd be foolish and actually, you know, worse if we didn't use that information. One of the things that we had been working on is really leveraging the relationships and the networks that already exist in the community, networks with whom folks are already are aware of and use and rely on. So if post-disaster there was an issue with disaster meals, and we really look at that early, because, you know, that being one of the most basic needs of sustaining life is food, and we really worked through this a lot throughout the pandemic. Where is that need going to be greatest, and how can we identify any gaps and address them now before that incident occurs? So again, we know how many folks that live below poverty level at the census level. We know how many folks are classified as ALICE, which is asset limited, income constrained, but they're unemployed, meaning they don't necessarily reach the criteria for poverty, but they also don't have enough to meet their most basic needs and paying the bills. And then how many folks rely on SNAP benefits. We also know how many folks do food distribution for a living, being food bank, the schools, partners like Operation Blessing, Mercy Chefs, the Southern Baptists, who do Meals on Wheels through senior services, as well as Centera and the Red Cross and the Health Department, you know, bringing all these folks together so we have a meal distribution plan. So if the need exists after a significant storm, flood, whatever it is, we know how the food pantry system is going to work and how that food distribution is going to happen. Folks already know where their nearest food pantry is, and so we're going to look to support that. Likewise, schools knows which school facilities with their kitchen capabilities where they might need to open up to augment those other efforts. And by and large, we should be able to know where we're going to have a fixed location, where we're going to have a mobile location, and where we're going to have just, you know, a regular food drop-off delivery, and where folks could just get a freaking hot meal, because that's really a lot of what you need for morale after you get hit by a storm. So we've really taken a lot of time to work through this piece, because, I mean, something as simple and important as food can really help folks get through that response and recovery process. and all the feelings of grief that they go through after experiencing any type of loss. So I'm really proud of these organizations who have stepped up to help us. And again, I don't want to put the plan in place, but I feel comfortable that when it comes time that these folks are at the ready and are going to help us. And some international folks that are in our own backyard, it's really a blessing to have them here. Any questions related to food distribution? All right. Now, whether it's the need for food or equipment or human resources or whatever it is, there is a process that goes into effect when there is an emergency operations center activation. As you can see from this chart, the folks that are out in the field, they're probably able to solve their own problems right then and there. Either calling their own department or, working across to another division. They're able to identify what the need is, especially, and if they can't solve it, they go to their respective departments who, when you read through their emergency operation plans, their department plans, they have contracts and agreements already in place that had already gone through procurement. They're standing contracts. They're at the ready. Or one thing I learned years ago was that when there are construction workers under permit in the city, they too, their equipment could be deployed in response to a disaster. So they could rely on their contracts and agreements to respond to the issue. If not, then that request needs to go up to one of those tables, whether it's the critical infrastructure table, the mass care table, the public safety table, or us at the logistics section. And then that's going to be when we take it to the next level, going throughout Team Norfolk and all of our partners, whether it's the business sector, nonprofits, our faith partners, one of our neighboring localities, and then statewide mutual aid and EMAC, Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And that's when we send a request to the state. It can't be solved. Statewide mutual aid, that request goes out throughout the entire Commonwealth. And if no locality is able to satisfy that need, it goes nationally, and that's the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And then at some point, a locality is going to respond to the state's request, and then the state is going to play matchmaker and put us in contact, and then we work out, the details of the work, of the price, of the, all that stuff, and then we get those resources in for however long that we requested them. Are there any questions regarding the logistics process? Because sometimes this gets convoluted. Sometimes folks just say, well, why don't we just, contact the governor? There is a process in place for this to be done, because if anyone went straight to the government or the governor and circumvented the entire process, nobody else would know that, and it might result in duplicate benefits or benefits or resources being canceled out from each other. And so instead of adding to that confusion, we make our resource request. When we do it to the state, there is a regional coordinator, and we send our request to them through their WebUC, and everything is documented along the way. And I can't stress enough the importance of documentation before, during, and after an event, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So if there's anyone on this call who needs a resource that we're able to help provide, because that's what Team Norfolk is, we're one team, one fight. If we can help in any way, or there's a chance of us being able to help, email us at EOC-logistics, and we're going to do what we can to find the right match, or at least put you in the direction where you can talk to someone who might also have that capability. Any questions on the logistics process? Any questions online, Daniel?
No, sir.
All right, thanks. All right, so going back to Katrina, which was 17 years ago, almost 18 years ago, we're not there with the importance of personal preparedness. It's a challenge. We know that there are challenges that people deal with on a daily basis. There's just not a lot of bandwidth to focus on what could potentially happen versus the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis, paying the bills, feeding the kids, and really just trying to stretch their dollar as much as they can. Personal preparedness means nothing to them because of the challenges that they face. Pet sheltering, we're good. The medical access and functional needs, I think we're getting there, but I think we need to button that up some more. But transportation-dependent populations, our partnerships, and understanding the state and federal tensions, we're good with all of those. Our plan was developed with the the information from the National Response Framework, from the Commonwealth of Virginia's emergency operations plans. I mean, all that stuff is embedded into our plan. So that's our one document, if you will, that will tell us all of the expectations and intentions of folks coming in from out of the area. Now, post landfall, hopefully you'll see the similarity between how we set up the emergency operation tables and what the community lifelines are that FEMA put together. These community lifelines are how we're going to determine the prioritization for response and recovery efforts. So we're going to go through each one, well, not during this call, but in the EOC, we would be going through each one of these, each table would go through their respective lifeline and give us a damage assessment of where that particular need is. And then it's going to be graded, so what is the problem? What does that mean? What do we need to do to fix it? And then what's the gap? And with that information, each of those lifelines is going to be designated a particular color, whether it's green, yellow, orange, red. And that'll be a good visual to tell us where we need to identify and fix the problem first, so other things can get underway as well. I can imagine communications. If the cell towers are down, that's going to be a very high priority. If transportation routes are down, that's going to be a very high priority because we rely on that transportation network to bring folks and resources in. So this is how we were able to get all that information in one snapshot and also relay it to the state, because we have 72 hours to give them an initial damage assessment. And that information is going to be used for the governor to determine if he hadn't already declared a local or a state declaration, that he would likely do that, but also whether or not they would be making a request, a disaster declaration request to the president through FEMA. Now, one of the things also that we have to help us through this process is Crisis Track. And Daniel Hudson, you've been instrumental in leading this effort to procure the same system that the state uses, procuring it here and training the staff on their damage assessment plans and how it would operate. Can I turn to you to speak a bit on Crisis Track?
Well, certainly. Thank you, sir. So Crisis Track is the damage assessment tool that the state uses to receive damage assessments throughout the locality or throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. We purchased Crisis Track about 3 years ago, and what Crisis Track is a damage assessment tool. So after the storm has gone through, we will deploy our damage assessment teams to certain areas around Norfolk. They will have a tablet or their phone, and they can do damage assessments on the spot, talking to the homeowner, taking pictures, answering the questions in the damage assessment tool, and it automatically gets uploaded into the damage assessment portal, which allows our finance team to be able to receive all of those reports, to look them over, and Crisis Track has all the ICS forms for FEMA as well. So all of that gets done within the software, and then we can submit all of that up to the state. And we have to submit the preliminary damage assessments to VDM within 72 hours. So that is the software that we will use in our damage assessments, who will go out into the field to take those damage assessments.
Thank you, Daniel. And great work with that. That's going to make it a lot more seamless, and it's going to be able to let us give Councilwoman Johnson and the rest of the City Council a really good idea of what that incident just cost us in terms of damages. At the same time, a lot of the folks on this call and their agency might very well experience damages as well. And while you may or may not have Crisis Track, we need to figure out a way for us to get that information to include in Norfolk overall, the Norfolk community's damage assessment. I don't think it's right to just look at public buildings and residential structures. I want to be able to really tell the story of the entire community, and would love your help in doing that. Now, we are very well aware that it's really the recovery that is the longest part of any disaster. Folks are still recovering from Katrina. So again, 18 years ago. So the two plans that we look at right off the bat are the basic and administrative plan, as well as our hurricane annex. But after a disaster, once the response is ending and the recovery is beginning, this is where we list so many of the recovery and assistance plans, whether there's a presidential declaration or not. This plan is there to help us get folks the help that they need in the best way that we can, whether it's facilitating among our nonprofits and our faith partners, or it's pointing them in the direction of available grant programs or loan programs. This is where we're going to turn to and really establish our battle rhythm based on that, so we can make sure, again, folks get the need that they have. So whether it's disaster recovery centers, opening them up, or a strategy to work with a lot of our community partners who can escort FEMA representatives throughout the community and their Tiger teams to get folks to sign up or register for FEMA assistance. All that stuff is in the short-term to an intermediate recovery strategy. And then lastly, for the longest part, is our long-term recovery. There's a little more ambiguity in the long-term recovery plan, but it's inclusive, or it provides a crosswalk, if you will, from our mitigation goals and objectives, from our green infrastructure plan, our climate plan, our resilience strategy, because when we're looking at long-term recovery and making significant investments to rebuild any structures that may have been destroyed, there's often the will to do it quickly. And obviously, our leaders, elected and otherwise, want to get folks back up on their feet quickly. But at the same time, we want to make sure that when we do rebuild and recover, we're doing it in a smart way that'll make us more resilient in the future. And those strategies are already developed in so many other plans. So rather than starting from scratch with some public meetings, we resort to the long-term recovery plan to kind of set the stage, which will build on the work and the time and the resources that the community as a whole put into these efforts, and then really start the conversation with that. So if it's a hurricane incident, we're using these 4 documents. Initially, we're using the basic plan and the hurricane plan. And then after that, and the response dies down, we're looking at the short-term to intermediate recovery. And then finally, when we go to recovery support functions, we're looking at that long-term recovery piece, which is reflective of a lot of other council-adopted plans from the not-too-distant past. Any questions on these? Okay, finally.
Line, sir.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Finally, I mentioned documentation, and I cannot emphasize this enough. I hesitate to have it at the end. It really should be every other slide in this presentation because documentation is that important. If you haven't read the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, I don't blame you. It's a lot of dry reading. But our job in my office is to read this, so you don't have to. But I can tell you that it becomes pretty sexy pretty quick, because when you're the one that says, well, hey, if you document this cost, we're going to save this many millions when it comes time for federal assistance. And so we've done it before. I'm going to review this document again to make sure that we're not missing anything. And again, embed this information into our plan that tells us what needs to be documented, how often it needs to be documented, under what conditions it must be documented. Do the memorandums of understanding, do they have to exist prior to? Can they be contingent on an emergency or not? And the answer is no. All this information gives us exactly what we need to get maximum return from any federal assistance that we may be eligible for. It also, in our basic plan, tells you what threshold needs to be met for us to be considered for government assistance. We've seen too recently, so many disasters where people would shout, "Where's FEMA?" FEMA was never intended to be a response agency. And for us to get any type of FEMA assistance or presidential declaration federal assistance, there are certain criteria that must be met. And so we made sure that that was listed in our plans as well. But the key message of this slide and the overarching theme for any disaster, hurricane or otherwise, we have to document everything that we do. And if we don't, there will be sadness for a lot of folks on this end. And we'll be missing out on money that could otherwise be reimbursed into the city's budget. And I don't want to have that conversation with Ms. Johnson or Dr. Filer or anyone else saying that we missed an opportunity to recoup a lot of the funds that went towards an unbudgeted disaster or incident. And with that, folks, that is the presentation, the briefing I had, and wanted to open it up for any questions, comments, or concerns, given that we're already seeing a couple storms out in the Atlantic. And yeah, we need to be ready sooner than later. Not everyone at once, though.
If you have a question, you can use the raise your hand function, or you can type it in the chat. At this time, sir, we don't see anything in the chat, but if you want to, you can stop sharing your screen as well.
Okay, okay, there we go. Well, let me ask this. If there's no questions, Daniel and Scott and Karen, is there anything that I missed?
Nothing from our end. It was a great presentation, and it looks like you're getting that as well in the chat. People are saying great job.
Thanks, guys. I don't seem to be able to. Oh, there we go.
Right next
Stop
to it.
sharing.
There you go.
All right. Walt Soto, I think I saw your hand raised.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
I'm just wanting to get a clarity on where the acute care hospitals, in the city are classified. I didn't see them in the critical infrastructure graphic. Can you clarify?
Absolutely. Yeah, they would be tied in with public health, and also connected to the Eastern Virginia Healthcare Coalition, who may not have a seat in our EOC, but I know they're working closely with y'all. I need to make sure that FEMA has the acute care hospitals down there as well. So I'm glad you asked.
Okay. Well, if there's anything that you need from our side, obviously we've done a great job with this briefing, and we're here to help.
Thanks, Walt. Thanks for everything you guys and CHKD does.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Cheryl Simpson, sir. The question is, the community hubs, is this a place for people to go to after a disaster? If so, need to be sure it's accessible.
Absolutely. That's why I love you, Cheryl. I'd love to incorporate you into these planning processes. We're actually looking at two different strategies. There are a couple churches with Councilwoman Johnson that I'm working with, and it's pretty much letting them know how we envision this to work. And then there's another group that we're working with, and we're kind of letting them build it based on how they think it should work. And I'm interested to see how it works in both ways. And it might just be, community specific on how it works best. But absolutely, accessibility. Yeah, and you know me, Cheryl. I mean, everything that we do is going to have an accessibility nexus to it. So I'd love for you to kind of review and otherwise stay looped in on these efforts, though.
Thank you, sir. We just have a comment.
Just so you know, this is Cheryl. I'm retiring at the end of the year. And so my replacement, I will be having that person once they're hired, start to go to these emergency planning things. So I'll introduce whoever that person may be. They haven't yet been hired. But I wanted you to know that I am officially retiring in December.
Thanks, Cheryl. Actually, we asked that be disapproved, that you're not going anywhere. But if you want to bring another someone from the Independence Center, we'd love to talk with them as well. But hate to see you go, but I understand. Thanks, Cheryl.
Hey, is there a possibility of being on that other advisory group that you mentioned the city council approved as a citizen of Norfolk?
Okay, yeah, I mean, we can talk about that. So the interesting thing about these boards and commissions that are at the council level, it's not me who decides on who sits on them, which I really appreciate, because I don't want to provide any undue influence and only get folks that I like to be on the committee. I want to really use it as a way to be held accountable to folks that I not be thinking about. So, but certainly having someone represent the community that you do needs to be on there. So I'll put you in the direction of how to apply for that, and it might be through your council member to get on there.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl.
No other questions in the chat, sir.
Awesome. All right. Well, folks, this was the only presentation that we had scheduled today. Wanted to make sure that you knew what our plan was. And when I say our, it's collectively our plan, because it's exactly what we're going to turn to when Brett or a different storm starts heading in our direction. Again, if you have any questions or concerns after this meeting, please feel free to reach out. If there is a storm coming, you're going to hear from us right away with Norfolk Alert, and we're going to activate the HISN page and make sure that we're doing the information sharing as quickly as possible. If there's nothing else, Daniel, I'll turn it to you to conclude or do any, roundabouts to see if there's, any comments about anything. But otherwise, folks, I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your partnership. Every one of you, I appreciate your friendship as well. And thanks for your time. And you will get almost an hour back of your day as my gift to you. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. The only thing I'd like to bring up is we do have Pride Fest on Saturday. The festival will begin at noon and it'll go till 8 o'clock and it'll be at Town Point Park. We will have a unified command for that event. So we're looking forward to hopefully a dry Saturday, but we are forecasting some weather. So fingers crossed the weather will go around us. That is the only thing we have on our end. If you have something from your organization that you would like to pass along, please go ahead and put it in the chat or raise your hand. We'll just give a moment just to make sure. Scott, do you have anything, sir?
Well, I just want to promote, we have an event this Saturday with the Norfolk CERT and the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. It's a reunion field day, so anybody interested in CERT, please come out. But any CERT members, any amateur radios, they can come out and get refreshed on 5 different skill stations and get back into CERT and get back into helping the community and learn more about amateur radio and how to be involved in that important emergency aspect. So that's this Saturday at Tarleton Park from 10 to 3. And like Daniel, we're hoping the weather stays off and lets us both have a great event. Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Well, seeing no hands raised or no other comments or questions in the chat, I just remind you that we posted a lot of links to the forums or websites that Jim was speaking about. If you do not have access to the chat and would like something later, you can just go ahead and email us and we'll make sure we have those to you. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you.